people that he went to school with, that he interacted with, had unkind things to say about him.
Bryan Kohberger's lawyer had good reason to be concerned. Newly released reports from Idaho State Police reveal all of the red flags and concerns faculty and staff and students at Washington State University had about Bryan Kohberger before he murdered 4 University of Idaho students. I go through the information, including his mistreatment of women, his obsession with serial killers, and what's going on with this video that looks like Kohberger in prison that's been floating around social media. I'll explain. Welcome to Crime Fix. I'm Angenette Levy. Bryan Kohberger actually told a woman, "I don't date broken women." And he also told a colleague that whoever committed the Moscow murders must have been really good. Those are just a few of the new pieces of information I've found in a stack of Idaho State Police reports documenting the agency's role in the investigation into the murders of Maddie Mogan, Kaylee Gonsalves, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. Kohberger admitted to the crimes last month, pleading guilty to 1 count of burglary and 4 counts of murder. And now he's serving 4 consecutive life sentences at Idaho's maximum security institution. Now, one thing we're learning from the reports that may not be entirely surprising given what we're dealing with here and what else we're learning, Bryan Kohberger apparently liked to watch himself on television. That's coming from an interview of an inmate who was in the same pod of the Latah County Jail with BK. The report states, after arriving in their pod, Kohberger immediately sat down and watched the news about his arrest, watching multiple channels that were covering the story. Kohberger said, "Wow, I'm on every channel." The inmate also stated, Kohberger was very quiet and it was very awkward having him in the pod. And get this, the inmate said Kohberger watched the trial of another accused murderer very closely, the trial of Alec Murdaugh in South Carolina. That was in February 2023 and early March of the same year. The inmate said Kohberger never talked about his case, but seemed smart and psychoanalyzed everything. This inmate, whose name is redacted, also said Kohberger used 3 bars of soap each week and took hour-long showers each day and washed his hands so much that they were red. He also said Kohberger wanted fresh bedding and clothes each day. The inmate said Kohberger talked with his mom on video calls a lot and told her to get an attorney after seeing somebody on the news. The inmate said Kohberger was smart and talked over him because of his vocabulary and that he loved baseball. His favorite team was the Yankees. And the inmate also said Kohberger claimed his favorite movie was American Psycho, starring Christian Bale. Now to those interviews with professors and students at Washington State University, where Kohberger was getting his PhD in criminal justice and criminology. Kohberger was in his first semester at the school and he was a teaching assistant, and it wasn't going well for him. Students were complaining about him, particularly female students. Last spring, BK's lawyer, Ann Taylor, she said she was very concerned about the students possibly being called to testify in the penalty phase, because she said the behavior that they complained about was because of his autism. Take a look.
When I look through the mounds of discovery, there are probably 100 hours of interviews of people that Mr. Kohberger went to school with at WSU. And of course, those interviews come just hours and days after the headlines hit that Mr. Kohberger's been arrested in this case. And people that he went to school with, that he interacted with, had unkind things to say about him. And a lot of their unkind things, when you understand them in the context of autism, the way he may stand in a room near a doorway, the way he may look too long at a person, their interviews are different when you know he has autism and you know the characteristics he displays. But those awful comments, those mean comments about him, if the state uses those as aggravators, that's using his autism characteristics.
I cover a lot of really scary crime stories here on Crime Fix, and if it's taught me anything, it's that privacy and personal safety absolutely cannot be compromised, especially when it comes to your personal data online. You would be shocked at how much of your information, like your name, phone number, and even home address is just floating around the internet for data brokers to find and sell. Do you ever wonder why you get so many of those annoying spam calls and emails? Well, that's why our sponsor, Incogni, is a crucial tool that helps you take back control by automatically identifying which data brokers have your info and then demanding they remove it. Incogni actually found 50 brokers with my information, and within days, they started getting me removed. It's so easy to use. Just create an account, authorize Incogni to act on your behalf, and let them handle the rest. And now Incogni users can wipe their info from an even wider range of websites with the unlimited plan's new custom removals feature. All you need to do is copy and paste the link to sites where you've noticed concerning data breaches cropping up and creating issues in your life, and a team of privacy specialists will take care of the rest of it. The new Incogni Unlimited feature even allows users to customize their data removals and tackle the toughest of breaches with the help of a team of privacy specialists. So if you care about your online safety, and you should, take your personal data back with Incogni. Use the code CRIMEFIX below on the screen and get 60% off an annual plan. Now, maybe some of Bryan Kohberger's behaviors, his social awkwardness, was due to his level 1 autism, but one of his female professors told detectives she feared Bryan Kohberger would one day become a predator. The investigators wrote, she told her colleagues, he is smart enough that in 4 years, we will have to give him a PhD, and mark my word, I work with predators. If we give him a PhD, that's the guy that in that many years when he is a professor, we will hear is harassing, stalking, and sexually abusing of his, I thought would be his, his students at wherever university he ended. This same professor said that Kohberger liked to dominate conversations, went on monologues, and stated his opinions as fact. Students felt he mansplained to them. Also, her class with Kohberger met on Thursday afternoons, and the Thursday after the homicides, Kohberger missed class. The report states she noticed a bandage on Kohberger's middle and ring fingers of his right hand. Kohberger told her it was from a silly accident that happened indoors. She didn't think it happened indoors because it looked like it had been scraped on asphalt. She believed she observed this injury prior to the homicides, but wasn't certain. She said Kohberger was systematically late to her classes. One time he arrived on time and she told him, "Hey, you're not late today," and he laughed awkwardly. There were things the professor told detectives that she had heard about, but had not witnessed. The report states Kohberger told a female student that was both disabled and gay that he would need his partner to be physically perfect and a disability would not be acceptable. She also said Kohberger kept telling her he wanted to study emotions and decision-making, and she did not remember the details of the story, but recalled Kohberger had said something homophobic. Now, the professor said she felt Bryan Kohberger was actually stalking people. And because of performance issues with Kohberger and his TA duties, they recommended cutting his funding to get him out of the program. Meanwhile, a male WSU professor told detectives that Kohberger would come to his office on Fridays and basically want to talk to him endlessly, almost in a way to control his time. He said he wondered whether Kohberger could have committed the murders, but called it a fleeting thought. Investigators also interviewed a 24-year-old woman who was a PhD student. She had a disability. She said she told someone she had a bad feeling about Kohberger when she met him, but that person told her she should give him a chance. The woman said she confronted Kohberger about the way that he was speaking to women, and she told investigators they had a diverse group in their class, and she noticed early on that he didn't like people who were not the same demographic as he was. The woman said Kohberger's mannerisms contributed to his rudeness, and she even called him out for how rudely he treated a deaf student. She said Kohberger stared at people in an intimidating way. Investigators wrote, several of the students supported her rebuke of Kohberger. Kohberger responded to her by saying, "I care how you feel, but you are wrong." The woman told investigators that after this, she felt targeted by Kohberger. He would do things like stand by her desk so she couldn't get out of it. She said Kohberger would talk her into the ground about how she was wrong, about whatever topic he was interested in discussing, essentially berating her. Now, this next part is really creepy. The student said she was interested in the fact that since the Moscow murders, some people were comparing them to the Ted Bundy murders that occurred at a college sorority, and that Kohberger wanted to talk about those murders with her. The student said Kohberger studied sexual burglars and their motivations and decision-making. We now know that Kohberger was essentially obsessed with serial killers and searched them on his phone, including Ted Bundy. The woman said she felt that everything Kohberger did was calculated and that he wanted to be viewed as the strongest and smartest person in the room. And she recalled in November seeing him once with bloody knuckles, and he had started wearing a big puffy coat to class, which was unusual. And get this next thing. Kohberger said if he were to ever have a sexual partner, they would have to have no physical or mental disabilities. They would have to be straight and the opposite of gender nonconforming. The student said some students believed Kohberger was autistic, but she thought he was a narcissist. The student also said when she first heard of the homicides in this case, she wondered if it could have been Kohberger who carried them out. Now, these reports are quite lengthy. The student said she also discussed the death penalty with Kohberger. The student said Kohberger was the only student in the class that believed in the death penalty. Kohberger asked her if her 12-year-old daughter was raped and murdered, if she would support the death penalty. She also said she noticed that Kohberger was regularly late for classes where a female was instructing and rarely when a male was instructing. She said that on one occasion, Kohberger expressed to females in the class that once he was in the job market, they would be screwed in competing against him for a job. The student said Kohberger is always the first person to express his support of police. She said Kohberger committed these homicides because he wanted to know what it felt like to commit these crimes in relation to his studies, and ultimately, if he could get away with the crimes, further supporting his belief that he was smarter than others. She said committing these crimes and his need to control others is consistent with his personality. So that right there is one of Bryan Kohberger's PhD classmates giving her theory on why he committed these murders. She believes he wanted to know what it felt like since he was so focused on offender decision-making and sexual burglaries. Another student who was interviewed by detectives recounted what she said Kohberger told her, and it could reveal why he committed the murders at the time that he did. She described Kohberger as a vegan, a strong Catholic, and that he did not drink. The woman said she and Kohberger discussed their study of violent offenders. This included areas of study like sexual burglary, sexual assault, and forensic awareness. He talked about different emotions violent offenders might have. He discussed how offenders might avoid getting caught. These people were criminology students, so of course the topic of the murders in Moscow came up, and the student said she discussed them with Kohberger. Detectives wrote, referring to the Moscow homicides, Kohberger had stated that whoever had committed the homicides must have been pretty good. This conversation occurred approximately 3 weeks after the homicides occurred. They discussed the idea that students were getting ready to leave for the winter break right after when the homicides occurred, and that this timing made it a good choice by the murderer. So they actually discussed the fact that these murders were committed before the winter break was about to start, and that timing was better for the murderer. Is this why Bryan Kohberger chose mid-November to commit these crimes? The report continued. In reference to the Moscow homicides, he would say that it was horrible. In discussing whether the murderer would be caught, he said maybe it was a one-and-done type thing. She said Kohberger sometimes discussed the evidence left behind at crimes and how an offender might mitigate against that by wearing gloves. These statements were related to her research work and not specific to the Moscow homicides. She said he did not discuss vehicles, surveillance, or weapons that could be used, but did talk about the time of day that offenders might choose. The student also said she had never met someone who was so condescending to women, and she didn't understand why the faculty didn't do something about him. Detectives wrote, Kohberger had asked if she was single. She discussed her relationship with her partner. He asked about other friends of hers and if she was interested in getting together outside of school. She said she was not interested. She said she had told him she had been, and this part is redacted, I think it says that she had been sexually assaulted, and stated that he did not date broken women. The woman said people in the department wondered whether he was an incel, that's someone who is involuntary celibate and therefore develops hatred for women. She also said there were some in the department who wondered by the way BK treated women, whether he was a possible future rapist. I'd like to bring in Dr. Daniel Bober. He's a forensic psychiatrist, and he's been looking through some of this material with me. Dr. Bober, your initial thoughts on reading some of this. We have Bryan Kohberger, away from home for the very first time in his life, goes to WSU. He's going to get a PhD in criminology and criminal justice. And it seems he gets there and he's just offending everybody right and left. He's making colleagues uncomfortable. He's making female students uncomfortable. Very kind of creepy stuff. And I'm seeing that Bryan Kohberger as a TA felt he had a little bit of power. At DeSales, he was just a student, so he didn't have any power. So your thoughts?
So full disclosure, I've never evaluated him personally, so I can't make a firm diagnosis. But there seems to be elements of dominance, power, and control. There's clear interpersonal dysfunction. He has hostility towards women and a sense of entitlement. The way he interacts with people, obviously, it's very off-putting. But to me, it seems like he's someone who really enjoys being in control and having a sense of power. And we've seen some of these things in other killers like Ted Bundy, like Dennis Rader, like Edward Kemper. So it's very familiar stuff.
He had an animus toward females, and the women that were interviewed, the professors who were interviewed, could see that he was not mixing well with female professors. They were taking polls and keeping track of how often he was late to the classes of female professors versus males, which he was never late to their classes. I mean, he's saying things to women. There was a colleague of his who it appears was sexually assaulted, and she revealed that to him. And he said, "I don't date broken women." My response to that is it appears that Bryan Kohberger doesn't date any women. So is this just like something in his brain that he thinks I'm too good for that? Like he's building himself up?
Or maybe he's someone who's been rejected by women. He seems to objectify them. Is this something that he was born with, or is this something that he learned? Obviously, there's neurobiology involved in terms of his temperament and personality traits, but he might be someone who was subjected to trauma, to abandonment, to bullying. All these things could have shaped who he is as an adult.
When the topic of the Moscow murders came up with him and one of his colleagues, he said in one instance, "Oh, yeah, that's horrible." But in another instance, he said, "Yeah, whoever did that, it's pretty good." And they're talking about this in the context of these are two PhD students who are discussing a horrific crime that happened about 15 minutes away from them. But he's saying, whoever did this was pretty good. And the person who did it, they agreed was pretty smart to commit this crime in mid-November because the kids were going to get ready to go home for the winter break. Could that be this simple, that he picked that time because he knew the kids would be dispersing for winter break? This would create chaos on campus, and that it would make it harder for the investigators to interview people?
Absolutely. But listen, this is someone who always from the beginning has had an interest in criminology, right? He blurs the line between his own interests and his own personal pathology. So when he talks about some of these other killers, this might not just be because he's interested in what drove them. It may be admiration. It might be identification with their methods, with the way they operated. So I think he's quite fascinated by it because in some way he sees himself in them.
He also, tried to discuss this with one of the other students, and he brought up Ted Bundy and the Chi Omega murders and how these were similar. And he really wanted to discuss the Chi Omega murders with her. Is this a way of him to kind of put him on the level in his brain without taking off the mask, that he did something just like Bundy, and by talking about Chi Omega, he's basically reliving what he did?
Well, I think he's fascinated with it. I think he identifies with it at some level. It's almost like he's admiring the way an artisan performs. And it's really so interesting because you have to wonder if this is someone whose violent fantasies became reality in a way that just was so gratifying for him that it was really the only way he knew how to operate based on his upbringing and based on his hardwired personality.
What we're reading in these documents is really so disturbing. And it sounds like you've kind of boiled it down to this is somebody who likely was rejected. This was somebody who wants to be in a position of power and control. I mean, and then he talks about with his other colleagues, just being fascinated by the decision making and the emotions of the offender. I kind of think he was fascinated by all of this and obsessed with it because it was speaking to him. Do you think that's possible, or it's just because he wanted to do this and plan this and carry it out, and so he's fascinated by how they felt, or was it just simply that he wanted to know how it felt to kill somebody?
So it could have been both. It could have been subconscious. He could have been interested in it, but maybe he was trying to learn about himself. Maybe it was a voyage of self-discovery. Again, there's a lot of elements here. We have narcissism, we have grandiosity, we have this gender bias and hostility towards women, which again may be a defense mechanism against his own feelings of inadequacy, harassment, intimidation, objectification, boundary violations, a sense of entitlement, these deviant sexual interests, low empathy, callousness, all these different traits which could be suggestive of a variety of different disorders and things that we've seen in other serial killers that he portrays.
Well, it's really disturbing. And these reports from Washington State University, these police reports on the interviews have, I think, been really, really revealing. Any final thoughts?
No, I think that these interactions with other people really complete the picture. This is really the best way to get a window into his state of mind is based on these interactions he's had and how he lived his everyday life. I think these are invaluable when it comes to really putting it all together and what drove him and motivated him.
Well, Dr. Daniel Bober, thank you for your time. As always, I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So at the beginning of the show, I mentioned very briefly that video that's been floating around social media. It appears to show Bryan Kohberger in a cell at the prison. I reached out to the prison and they said they are investigating this. They did warn against possible AI and the use of AI in enhancing videos, but it certainly does look real. The prison is investigating. They said they warned and reminded staff about not doing anything like this back on July 23rd and July 25th. And if it is determined that this video is indeed authentic, then this person is in big trouble and could be criminally prosecuted. That's it for this episode of Crime Fix. I'm Angenette Levy. Thanks so much for being with me. I'll see you back here next time.